Our first speaker is going to be Michael Kaneto, the president and CEO of the University of Wisconsin Foundation, and he assumed that role. He's coming up on an anniversary. He assumed that role about a year ago, October of 2010. And prior to leading the foundation, he was dean of the UW Business School for 8 years, and that's maybe how many of you know him, or that's when I first met Mike. When he was dean, he orchestrated the novel $85 million Wisconsin naming gift, the expansion of Granger Hall on campus, which is absolutely beautiful, and the restructuring and the improved national standing of the full-time MBA program. And prior to joining UW-Madison in 2002, he was an associate dean of the MBA program and a professor of international economics at Dartmouth. He also served as senior staff economist for the President's Council of Economic Advisors for former presidents George Herbert Walker Bush and Bill Clinton. So he has excellent credentials, and I think about how young he was when he was doing that. Mike is a native of Wisconsin. He completed his undergraduate studies in economics and math at UW-Eau Claire, and he has his PhD in economics from Stanford. So excellent credentials, outstanding credentials. It's interesting to note that three of our speakers this morning graduated from UW-Eau Claire. So if you're a fan, Mike is going to give us an economic outlook for Wisconsin and explain the implications of global trends on the Wisconsin economy. And that's one of the reasons I was motivated to initiate this program, is that I don't think we talk enough about trends and global trends that already are influencing us and will influence us. So I think I want this to be an impetus for doing more of that. I think all of us yesterday afternoon and this morning are thinking a bit about Steve Jobs from Apple. He said he wanted to make a nick in the universe. Well, obviously he did, and he was a visionary and certainly talented. So I think we can all take motivation from Steve and say that we need to use our talents, and all of us can try to look around the corner and see what's in the future and try to be visionary in some respects. But now let's welcome our first speaker, Michael Kaneto.
Well, thanks very much, Mary. It's great to be here. I've been up this way a few times and had a chance to speak at UW-Marathon County. And I have to say, I'm really impressed by the room upgrade we've got here. The last couple times I spoke, it was in a much darker space, and this is really fantastic, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for that. And I also wanted to mention, Mary forgot to say, my main academic credential was I was a general studies major at Rhinelander High School. So I want to give credit where credit is due. I always like to say, my teachers there were so good, I was prepared to succeed in spite of my own indifference toward education at that time. And you can never thank people enough for that. First, a bit of humility about this. Let me see here. All right. I do want to say, I think I have something to add to the discussion about how maybe the global economy affects this region. I've studied global economics most of my life. I have a little less time to devote to it now, but maybe a lot of human capital to draw on. So I think I understand what's going on in the world economy. I've traveled quite a bit, did a lot of research on international economics in my academic life and my policy advising. I don't know nearly as much as you do about the local economy, of course, and so with a little bit of humility, I'll offer some ideas about where I think things might go, but I don't want to suggest that I think I have all the answers. You know more the reality on the ground here than I ever could. But Mary's right, and Eric's preamble referencing Thomas Friedman is certainly accurate. There is a very profound sense in which the way the global economy has changed, in particular, the fact that the relevant marketplace of people has probably more than doubled in the last 25 years, has had a profound impact on the American economy. How did the relevant market double? Well, China, India, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union, all very large regions with lots of people, entered into the global trading system that previously was dominated by Western Europe, the United States, Canada, Central and South America to a degree. And when you have a doubling in the size of the people involved in the relevant market, of course, the way production specializes and where you find it most cost effective to do things in a much larger economic space will change, and over time have a profound effect even on this region, even though we may not feel like we're directly competing in very many specific markets. It shapes opportunity. I think the other profound thing that's happened is it's probably changed the balance of returns a bit in the favor of capital as opposed to labor, because capital's more mobile and there are a lot of choices about where to invest capital now, and I think that's probably changed the traditional balance between returns on capital and labor. And so probably, you know, we might think in the long run we would all do slightly better on our investments because of that, since the ability to invest isn't distributed nearly as evenly as the ability to work. That's probably skewed the income distribution quite a bit. So I'll talk a bit about the global linkages that affect central Wisconsin, and then how we might position this region to better compete. And I use quotation marks because I want to say a little bit about what I think that might mean as we go along. So why does the global economy matter for central Wisconsin? When I think about it, there's probably three main channels by which it matters. The first is through the financial system. That is certainly a global system now that allocates capital. Capital moves around the world at a rapid pace, and that affects economies all over. And the Great Depression was certainly an episode of a global financial crisis where people lost confidence in the banking system, and that had huge effects on every region. The 2008 financial crisis, similarly, I would say policymakers did a good thing. We probably did learn one important lesson from the Great Depression, and that is, as much as we might like to see the banking system punished for its mistakes, the costs that brings upon everyone else in the economy, it's not worth it. So we recapitalized banks to some extent and created new facilities to keep the banking system able to function. We kind of stopped the run on conventional investment banks after the failure of Lehman Brothers. We didn't allow the next dominoes to topple. If we had, I believe we probably would have been looking at something like another Great Depression. The next financial crisis, you know, right now there's a lot of talk about the sovereign debt crisis facing European governments, and many people worry that could bring on a replay of 2008 or worse. I don't happen to be in that camp. I actually think there's much less concern about bailing out banks in Europe than there was in our system. I think in the United States we kind of feel like we pride ourselves on being more market oriented with less government intervention, and if somebody isn't doing a good job, well, they're on their own. And so it took a lot of, I think, political will in some sense for us to actually help a banking system that had taken so much out of the economy in compensation leading up to 2008. That really irritated people justifiably, and we're still seeing the reverberations of that today with the Occupy Wall Street movement and other things. I don't think Europeans are as averse to helping their banking system through a crisis, partly because their bankers have never been paid so much in the first place. They've kind of put the economy at risk without being paid a lot, you know, if you want to think of it that way. So it's a little easier for them to find the political will. There is more government intervention in the economy in the first place in Europe. So I don't think the European governments will let the banking system fail unless, you know, there's some kind of constraints that they feel because of the structure of the European Union that prevents them from working it out effectively. But but I just don't think there's the natural aversion to helping the system get through it as much as, you know, they may not want to help specific industries in that way. The global economy also matters for firms that trade with foreign buyers directly. But then the thing I'll talk more about is that the internationalization of markets affects prices and resource allocation really in every corner of the economy almost imperceptibly by the law of comparative advantage. And that's the big driver of structural changes in the economy, and that's actually where global has a big impact. You can't see it day to day, but you see it show up in long-term trends that shape where employment is in this country. And I think that can be helpful to planning because these trends, you know, the drivers are very steady. It's the globalization and the technology change right now, and you can kind of see what it's doing to employment in certain sectors. And I think from that, project, well, where should we be trying to help ourselves get to the future a little faster and maybe more successfully? So with financial crises, I've more or less said what I want to say. You know, the financial system is vital. I mean, you know, at a fundamental level, it's the only thing that prevents us from living in a world of self-sufficiency. You know, where we all go home and we've got our own, you know, cattle and, you know, we're growing our own food. I mean, you know, without a monetary system where you've got a medium of exchange and a store of value through something called money managed by the banking system, we wouldn't all be able to specialize and, you know, be really good at one thing and trade our labor services for all the consumption goods we need. So the financial system is really important, and that's why you don't want to let it fail. So the health of and confidence in the financial system is essential for transactions and economic activity. You know, the scary thing about the last 4 or so years for me, never in my life as a professional economist did I spend 1 second thinking about, I wonder if all the paper and electronic bookkeeping entries I'm getting reports on that tell me what my investments are worth and my bank account, I wonder if I'm actually going to be able to convert all that into consumption at some point. If I can't, I'm going to be really disappointed. You know? And I never spent 1 second of my life worried about that. And I will be honest with you, there have been moments in the last 4 years where I've thought, I hope that works out okay. Because if it doesn't, I'm going to wish I'd spent a lot more of that money already, you know. So, you know, maybe it is time to buy a farm. I don't know. So when confidence in the financial system is lost, it can really destroy a market economy. And I don't want to suggest that I think we're on the verge of a replay of 2008. As I said, I don't think that's going to happen. But I'm being honest with you, I think about that question in a way I never did in my professional life before. The other thing is the linkages across national financial systems imply that our economy is impacted by global as well as domestic financial issues. And, you know, that's, again, in 2008, the real problems emanated from our credit markets, but they affected Europe and every other part of the globe. Anyone who was invested in U.S. mortgage-backed securities was affected by this. Could a European debt crisis affect us? Absolutely. And so hopefully they will head that off, and you know, we can avoid that catastrophe. The other big way global affects us, of course, is there's many products from central Wisconsin that are exported out into the global trading system, and you know, there are foreign buyers of our products. You know, a couple things around Marathon County that I think of right away. You know, the paper industry is part of a global market. There's not a huge share of Wausau Paper's output that's exported, but there is a certain amount of products, specialty products that are. Of course, ginseng was an agricultural product here that had one of its main markets in China. And, you know, both those things are really good for the local economy. There are also many products that we purchase here that are produced abroad, and because we're not, you know, specializing particularly in light manufacturers in this country anymore, toys and clothing, things like that that are very labor intensive, almost all of that is imported. And so when you're out buying stuff, you know, it's common to think, boy, you know, we don't produce anything in the United States anymore. Actually, we do export a lot from this country, but what we export is very R&D intensive, typically. If we're exporting manufactured goods, they tend to be manufactured goods that require very sophisticated engineering, heavy equipment, complex products. Glenn Tellock will talk to you a little bit about that from Manitowoc Company. But a lot of what we export has to do with many of the sort of newer products that are at the nexus of information technology, telecommunications, connectivity. You know, Mary mentioned the passing of Steve Jobs, a real tragedy, but you know, Apple Computer, I mean, they've certainly captured a big piece of the world market. And so a lot of what the country exports comes from some of the coastal regions, and we export a fair amount of stuff out of our state, but that stays within the country that meets other consumption needs of people in those parts of the country. So, but that purchasing and you know, the wide range of countries that send goods here that we see just is a reminder of the extent of specialization in the market today and how much it has expanded in the last 30 years or so. Direct linkages, though, through trade really do only affect a small fraction of firms. There aren't that many companies and businesses in this county or even this state that have foreign buyers or foreign suppliers. That's still fairly rare, but that doesn't mean the global market doesn't shape our choices and our possibilities. So I said earlier, you know, the big thing that I believe affects everyone in the global economy is, you know, David Ricardo, a revered economist who lived, you know, about 200 years ago, wrote about the principle of comparative advantage. That was his attempt to explain why in a market system do certain things end up being made in certain locations, who specializes in what. And that's really what shapes possibilities for us. So specialization in any region, so that the activities that we choose to undertake here in Marathon County or the state of Wisconsin, even if we're not exporting and importing, you know, trading with foreign buyers, what we end up choosing to invest in, what makes sense, the industries that have the highest return on capital are shaped by the supply and demand conditions in the entire global marketplace. Because, you know, if it makes sense to make autos, let's say, in Korea and Japan more than the United States at a certain point, well, that means probably no one in Wisconsin is going to look at the economic landscape if they have capital to invest and say, you know, I think I'm going to build an auto plant in Wisconsin. You know, nobody's decided to do that in quite a while. It's not because people in Wisconsin couldn't make cars. We could. It's because no person with capital to invest has concluded that this is a cost-effective place to make cars relative to the other options. And that's really what comparative advantage boils down to. It's the notion that the whole supply and demand environment in the global economy will shape the possibilities in any particular market. It will determine what it might make sense to produce. And of course, there's a lot of persistence out there. There's a lot of sunk capital at any point in time, and that's why globalization, you know, you can say, well, you know, these other countries have now been trading with us for 20 years. Shouldn't the effects be over with by now? No, because there's a lot of sunk capital at any point in time, and so there'll be a lot of persistence to what we produce, but the new investments and kind of where we see growth at the margin will be shaped by these opportunities. So as I said, the global trading system has had kind of this unprecedented growth in the last 20 to 30 years. The number of countries that have decided to move toward a market-oriented system and begin to trade with us is really remarkable. And it's not surprising that would have an enormous effect on what we produce. Those new entrants in the large, you know, I mean, they're all different, of course, and the former Soviet Union is probably exceptional in that it had a very advanced education system, and so relative to the other new entrants, probably had a very high level of human capital. But most of these countries are characterized by very large populations of workers with very little education and training, and they are also very scarce in capital and technology, which means the things that we could do that they would really want from us were those very R&D intensive activities. And the things that they could do relatively cheaply that we could buy from them are toys, clothing. You know, and if you study the toy industry, it has moved like a brush fire around the globe to the place where the wages are the lowest and the labor is relatively most abundant, because those are generally like the easiest products to make. It's not that sophisticated. So if you look at where we bought our toys from, you know, for a while it was Japan in the 1940s and 50s, and then, you know, it starts to migrate through other countries of Southeast Asia, and it always seems to be at the kind of lower end of the economic totem pole. So the new entrants are net suppliers of light manufacturers and to some extent agricultural products, if we trust them to grow things without, you know, contaminants, whatever. Although services outsourcing is also becoming a big thing in India, and that will shape things in the service sector to a degree. And that's migrated to India, of course, because there's good English spoken there, or relatively good. You can talk to a call center and sometimes understand what they're trying to say to you. The core countries of the global market system, the US, Europe, and Japan, as a result of this integration, have seen greatly increased competitive pressure in manufacturing and agriculture, but great opportunity in the highest technology end of those sectors and this leading edge of industry that we call the knowledge economy at the nexus of IT, telecoms, and the internet. So globalization has kind of reinforced a trend that rising productivity and mechanization, robotics, et cetera, were already driving, and that is beginning with the mechanization of agriculture, and then the Industrial Revolution, and further advances in technology in manufacturing. The number of people we need to meet our needs in consumption of tangible things, food and manufactured items, is declining. And so the number of people that work in the service sector is growing. And I'll show you a chart that's really remarkable. Sometimes you have to look at really long periods of time to get an appreciation for how powerful this trend is. But this shows you 3 countries' distribution of workers across agriculture in the blue, manufacturing industry in the maroon, and services in the yellow. So this is the share of employment in those 3 activities in the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The Netherlands data and the UK data go all the way back to 1700. There's a guy named Angus Madison who has studied productivity and distribution of labor his whole life. He's about 85 years old now, so he wasn't around at the beginning of this slide, but almost, you know. And he's an interesting man. He was just driven by this stuff. Anyway, you can see in this, 1700s in the Netherlands and UK, it was kind of even distribution between the 3 sectors, with, actually in the UK, agriculture being dominant, more than half in 1700 of the workforce. And in 1820, agriculture had shrunk quite a bit in the Netherlands and the UK, and I'm sure shrunk a lot in the UK, not as much in the Netherlands, but 40% of the workforce, whereas in 1820 in the United States, it was over 60% of the workforce. And I'm sure in the UK, people were saying, what the hell, we got to stop trading with the United States because they're putting all of our farmers out of work. Well, it made sense, given the trade patterns and the productive opportunities, for more of the agricultural products to be grown here because it was a better location for agriculture than England was, okay? So, but if you roll forward all the way to 2002, it's amazing how that agricultural share of the workforce is down to, 2% in the United States, 1% in England. So we've kind of gotten through that. Nobody really talks about it anymore, but believe me, when the mechanization of agriculture was going on, there was a panic about what's going to happen to all these workers, not unlike the conversations we've had for the last 25 years about manufacturing. Now, what's interesting is with, agriculture, I think now with hindsight, we might look back on that and write the story quite differently than we would have when it was unfolding. We write about it now as if the mechanization of agriculture was a great thing, an example of progress and productivity growth, and isn't it great we can get all of our food with only 1 or 2% of our population working in that sector, whereas it used to take 65% or 70%. You know, we always used to joke when I was at the Council of Economic Advisors in the early 90s, you know, there was the deindustrialization crowd that was really in vogue then. You know, I used to say, yeah, you know, you're right. If you really want to improve employment, you know, quickly, what we should do is ban farm equipment. You know, and if you ban farm equipment, there'll be a ready demand for people to go out and work on farms. We won't be any better off for it, but we'd have a lot more jobs in the economy. So it really isn't just about jobs, it's about productivity when you really try to understand, you know, where we're going. And that doesn't mean transitions are easy, and I don't mean to minimize that. Transitions are difficult. This chart's a little busier, but it's much shorter a period of time. It's focused only on the share of employment in manufacturing. Beginning in 1970, it runs up to 2003. I tried to get a chart that somebody else had produced that just had a lot of developed economies on it. And, you know, I'm showing you this so that we understand this isn't just a U.S. phenomenon. Yes, we're kind of the leading edge of it. Our manufacturing sector was already much smaller than, say, Germany or the UK at the beginning of this chart. And as a result, you know, again, we have a lower share of jobs in manufacturing than these other countries, but they're all going the same direction, which tells you something. It isn't just, you know, our trade policies are more open than somebody else's. You know, yeah, maybe that explains a little bit of difference, but these are all going to the same place. And eventually where they're going is it's not going to take very many workers to meet our needs for stuff because of the way production happens in a modern economy and the availability of low-cost production in other countries. So if we just look at the last 20 years and what's happened from 1990 to 2010 for some major sectors of the U.S. economy, what you see is about half the economy in both these periods is comprised of 4 big sectors that I've chosen to highlight: manufacturing, education and health, government, and leisure and hospitality. And what you see is manufacturing has gotten a lot smaller. All 3 other areas have grown, and the most rapid growth has been in education and health. And that's probably where we might say we actually have lower productivity growth. That's why we're all talking about healthcare right now at the national level. And we should be talking about education as well. So we probably have not deployed technology as efficiently as we could in education to get done the work that needs to be done. So how global forces shape comparative advantage? It changes specialization in a country, and that has an effect on income levels and income distribution in the United States. The distribution across industries, regions, and individuals has changed greatly in terms of the volume of production and the returns to that activity. Much of the wealth creation in the United States in the last 20 years occurred in what we refer to as the knowledge economy at the intersection of IT, telecom, and the internet, and also life sciences to a degree, biotech, and also applications of knowledge economy products to seemingly boring industries like retail distribution. It's had a big effect. You know, Walmart has been one of the most rapidly growing companies, but Home Depot, Best Buy, you can rattle them off. There's been a lot of consolidation in how we distribute goods. We do it much more efficiently, but that has its own social costs. As evidence of this, you know, 5 of the top 20 market cap companies in this country were founded in 1976 or later: Microsoft, Oracle, Google, Cisco, and Apple. I'll be honest with you, I haven't checked that statistic lately. You know, markets are a little chaotic, but this was, you know, maybe a year ago. I just went in and ranked companies by market cap, and I'll tell you something, you won't find another country on the planet that can take a startup company especially a country as mature as ours, with lots of big companies already, and have a startup go from nothing to being one of the top 20 market cap companies in this amount of time. It's really remarkable. And it's a testament to the entrepreneurial spirit, the breadth and depth of capital markets, and our openness to innovation, I think. And that's been really, I think, one of the core foundations of economic success in our country. So other high-growth firms like Walmart or Home Depot, as I mentioned, apply some of the technology that these companies have created to very traditional, ordinary businesses and do great things with it and get great returns. And because so much of the wealth creation has been in these new sectors, I would argue, and they're very R&D intensive, we've seen an unusual skewing of the distribution of income and wealth like we haven't in a long time. And founders of those companies and the early employees, when you think about it, Bill Gates' startup company, the typical startup, maybe the founder, if he doesn't put in any capital, would probably have a 17% equity stake by the time you get to an IPO. He probably put in some capital too. So, you got one person that owns 30% of the biggest market cap company in America. That's, it's a lot of wealth creation. And yeah, Bill Gates was special. But you know what? There are a lot of companies that aren't quite that big, but they're big and very successful and very valuable that have been founded, again, in the last 25, 30 years. And so you just had this enormous concentration of the benefits. As I like to say, if it was IBM and GE that had been driving the knowledge economy revolution instead of all these startup companies, which could have been possible, they were already widely held public companies by the time this revolution took off. The benefits would have been much more evenly distributed. But that's not how it happened. And one consequence of those founders doing so well is I think that started to drive up executive compensation everywhere else, and it sort of exaggerated this difference between how people with college degrees and executive jobs are doing versus everyone else. And that's creating a lot of social tension, I'd say, right now, and it's something that I think will correct itself, but it may have some help being corrected through our political system, depending on how things play out. But these things do tend to correct themselves over time through competition. So regions with technology companies and individuals with college or advanced degrees have been the biggest winners in the economy. And that's something that we should all keep in mind when we think about how we want our region to develop. So what can a region do to become a bigger winner in this kind of world? Well, maybe the obvious thing that you would take away from what I've said so far is, well, we need to find our own Steve Jobs and start a company like Apple here in Marathon County, right? That would pretty much do it. We'd be in great shape. The problem with that is I don't think the next Apple is going to be created in Marathon County because we don't have the density of people working in this sector here. And so even if somebody here had a great idea, their ability to take that idea and build it into a business and compete with the best in the world would probably require them to locate somewhere else, and it would probably be Silicon Valley. Even some of the best ideas that come out of the University of Wisconsin in Madison, in Dane County, where you've got a bigger workforce that has advanced degrees, if you don't have enough people with experience in these sophisticated industries and a network of contacts, the probability of success goes way down. And so a lot of these ideas are going to migrate. And so while it would be great if we could just somehow magically come up with the next Apple and have them located in Marathon County, I don't think that's likely. If that happened, it'd be kind of like a lightning strike. I don't think it's anything you want to build your public policy around. So the question is, if we're not going to be able to play there, how do we play effectively in this world? And part of it is thinking about how can we serve the marketplace of people who are focused on those high-value exports so that we get a piece of the action of their spendable income. And so that's kind of where I would say you'd focus with strategy. So in Wisconsin, looking at that same chart of employment mix in those four sectors I delineated, we kind of have the same broad pattern. We have a bigger manufacturing sector in Wisconsin, relatively speaking, than we do in the nation by about 5 percentage points. And it's declining much more slowly than manufacturing is nationwide. And I think part of the reason for that is we're in the center of the country. We have proximity to a lot of markets that aren't as easily reached by foreign manufacturers, so we can win competitively in manufacturing in the heartland still in a lot of different places. Education and health is a big growth sector in our state as it is nationally. Leisure and hospitality a little bit. Government, I just put it in there to remind everyone how big that is. So observations on Wisconsin employment, we've got a much higher share of employment in manufacturing than the US. We've had a smaller decline. We still have, I don't have it on the pie chart, a larger exposure to the agricultural industry and quite a bit of tourism. And that means we've got a pretty balanced mix of employment. You know, if you were thinking about Wisconsin developing strategic industry policy, one of our problems is, you know, we've got some manufacturing, we've got a lot of education and health and some technology businesses in Dane County and a little bit in Milwaukee. We've got a lot of agriculture, and we've got tourism kind of growing in the northern part of the state. And, you know, the kind of regulations you might want for tourism, by the way, are quite different than what you might want for manufacturing. So as a state, it's difficult to probably reach agreement on what our policy makeup should be. The good news in this diversity is that it decreases our exposure or reliance to one particular sector, but it complicates our policies and our ability to probably get behind one thing. I would say that we have little traction in that knowledge economy cluster that's driven wealth creation nationally. Can we change that? I'm not so optimistic about that. You know, even though I'm in Dane County where we've got over $1 billion a year of export revenue coming into the university from outside the state, and we do a lot of research and development. There's a lot of intellectual property developed, a lot of patents. It's difficult to see a startup company come out of the university and really thrive and grow. It happens, but it's difficult. So I don't know that focusing on trying to change that makes a lot of sense. It certainly doesn't make sense statewide. If we're going to compete there, we should decide where we think the best chances are for the good of the state and try to make it easier there by developing the infrastructure that would support that kind of activity. So how can Wisconsin outperform? Most of you are probably aware, I just saw a chart in the Wisconsin State Journal yesterday that showed Wisconsin over the last 30 years has kind of fallen behind Minnesota and Iowa in income growth. We're still ahead of Iowa in per capita income, but it's much closer than it was 30 years ago, and Minnesota has really outpaced us. So how do we do better? One thing is, you don't really, let's face it, public policy doesn't allocate a lot of capital, so, what can we really do? I mean, what's going to happen is going to happen. You could say that. And we could do nothing and just hope that the sectors that the U.S. finds most attractive begin to move toward the ones we already have, manufacturing and agriculture. And in fact, the weakening of the dollar against the euro currency has actually helped us quite a bit over the last 4 years, I would argue. And it's brought manufacturing back to a degree, not necessarily by enabling us to sell more in Europe, but we can beat European competitors head to head in a lot of markets where we're both trying to play. Some of those are in the United States. So it's helped us a bit, and it's certainly helped agriculture. So, one thing is, maybe with energy costs going way up, transport will become very expensive, and the barrier of distance will mean more again, and our manufacturing and agriculture could become more valuable. And I think you see some signs of that. The other thing is to say, well, maybe we can grow and attract more of these knowledge-intensive businesses, and I've already said, I think, that's going to be tough. And it's really going to be tough if, through our political system, we say, well, if we're going to try to do that in Dane County, we should try to do that in every county in Wisconsin. Good luck. That's just not realistic. We're not going to have an Apple in every county in Wisconsin. If we had one thing, anything remotely close to Apple in our state, we would be thrilled, okay? And we probably need to think about where can that realistically happen? Where do you have enough human capital in place already? in management where, you know, it's got enough density. You know, one of the problems with startups, even in Madison, is people say, you know, you gotta bring in a CEO with experience in some of these industries. And maybe you can attract, you think, well, we should be able to attract someone to come and live in Madison. It's a nice town. You got lakes and, you know, it's a little bit cold in the winter. But some people in Silicon Valley are crazy. Maybe they want to get away from the congestion. Maybe we can get them to come here. You know what the problem is if I move my family from Silicon Valley to Madison for this startup company, and it probably has a failure probability of half, like most startups, especially in technology, maybe higher. What happens if that doesn't work out? Now I live in Madison, and I'm a technology, you know, executive. What do I do now? Okay. Maybe there isn't a next thing that looks anything remotely like what you're used to doing, and then you got to move back to Silicon Valley because that's where there's, you know, tons of options. So the density of the labor market really makes a big difference, and that's the sobering reality. So what can we do? I mean, obviously, a better tax and incentive climate for business is always going to help you across the board. The trade-off is you'd have to reduce public sector spending, and so that's what you're going to struggle with. You know, if we're going to attract more businesses to locate here, locate their headquarters here, you need to improve that climate. We also might need to spend a little bit more through the public sector on certain kinds of infrastructure, and I would say probably the most important is transportation. You know, proximity to markets and easy access is really important, and we don't have maybe the best transportation network and access, you know, in terms of airports. I think that's been a big advantage Minneapolis had over Milwaukee. Focused regional strategies, I think, make some sense to me. You know, really trying to emphasize tourism in the north, agriculture in the center, manufacturing probably from the Green Bay area all the way down through southeastern Wisconsin makes sense, and maybe try to emphasize new knowledge economy businesses in maybe in Dane County, maybe in Milwaukee, where you have a big labor market and a lot of highly educated folks. In the Wausau area, the big difference we see, again, even more manufacturing than the state and a smaller decline, and huge growth in education and healthcare, some growth in leisure and hospitality. So you've got a higher share of manufacturing. Tourism is not a major sector right around Wausau, but it has proximity to tourism, which adds to quality of life in the region and makes it an attractive place for all the other industries. The good thing about having a tourism industry is if you've got a place where other people want to come and vacation, wow, that's a great place to live. And so other businesses may want to locate there. So supporting that sector may make a lot more sense than people at first give it credit for, just because of the nature of the jobs or, you know, the fact that it's not a big part of the region already. So, and then I'd say the other unique feature of Wausau, it is a transport hub of sorts, you know, right in the center of the state, Highway 29, Highway 39 or 51, whatever they call it now, running through here. It's a real crossroads, and it kind of sits at the boundary between agriculture to the south, tourism to the north, and has its own manufacturing hub, I think, because of the transport network. So taking advantage of those attributes really makes sense. You've got a naturally diverse economic base, but that makes sense with this central location and access to markets. And I think the other thing, you've got a higher degree of social cohesion than some other economies in the state. You know, I think about the arts block that you all built in Wausau, a great public project. Obviously, you had to cooperate on that. And then I look at what Madison's trying to do. A guy wants to renovate the Edgewater Hotel with this, which is this, it's like the best hotel location probably in the state of Wisconsin on Lake Mendota, right near the Capitol, right near the university. And, you know, we just can't get this done. So the location on the boundary of tourism also helps you, I think. What are the opportunities to improve? I'd say continued cooperation, as you demonstrated on the Arts Block project or other things, on other types of public infrastructure projects that would benefit many different types of businesses. And then think about those big trends in employment and understand these are global phenomena. They're driven by technology and globalization, and some of it you really, you know, you can try to fight to hang on to jobs in some areas, but you know, you don't want to fight these trends too hard. You probably want to think about, well, where are things growing and how can we be really great at that? And I would say, to the extent, you know, everybody says most job creation is in small businesses, so we got to support small businesses. What they don't say is most job destruction is also in small businesses. You know, most of them fail. So you got to be careful taking that logic too far. And you want to discriminate about where you support entrepreneurship. And I would say you have to do it where there's reason to believe there's knowledge and experience advantages in the local market that might make you better equipped to succeed in that sector than others. And, you know, agriculture and food, advanced manufacturing, and then healthcare, especially healthcare delivery and home care of the elderly, may be areas where we could start businesses here because there's a lot of that work being done and a need for a certain type of innovation there. So I hope that these remarks will provide a useful backdrop to our speakers who know more about actual businesses. I know a little bit about the education business, but I'm looking forward to hearing what other speakers have to say. Thank you. Thanks.